My mother left me at a bus station when I was 10. 22 years later, one locked suitcase changed everything. I was 10 years old when my mother held my hand for the last time. The bus station in Nairobi was louder than I had ever heard it. Engines roared, vendors shouted over one another, and hundreds of strangers rushed past us without looking twice. My mother knelt in front of me, straightened the collar of my faded blue shirt, and smiled through eyes that looked far too tired. "Stay right here," she whispered. "I'll be back before your juice gets warm." She bought me a small carton of mango juice, kissed my forehead, and disappeared into the crowd. I waited. 10 minutes became an hour. The afternoon turned into evening. Every woman wearing a yellow dress made my heart race. Every familiar voice made me stand up, only to realize it belonged to someone else. I refused to believe she had left me. Mothers always came back. Mine had to. When the station lights flickered on, an elderly security guard noticed me sitting alone on the same bench. "Where are your parents?" he asked gently. "She's coming back," I answered without hesitation. He looked toward the crowded entrance, then back at me. There was pity in his eyes, and somehow that frightened me more than being alone. She never came back. That night changed every part of my life. The police searched the station for hours. They asked passengers, drivers, and shop owners if they had seen my mother. Nobody remembered her. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. Because no relatives could be found, I was taken to a small children's home on the edge of the city. For weeks, I refused to unpack the tiny backpack I had carried that day. I believed my mother would arrive any morning and tell everyone there had been a terrible misunderstanding. Every evening, I sat beside the gate, watching cars slow down before driving away again. Every evening, I went to bed disappointed. After a while, the other children stopped asking who I was waiting for. The caregivers stopped telling me to have hope. Even I stopped asking questions. Years passed. The orphanage became the only home I remembered. Some children were adopted by loving families. Others were reunited with relatives they never knew existed. Whenever visitors walked through the front gate, every child secretly hoped they had come for them. They never came for me. I learned something early in life. If you expected nothing, disappointment couldn't hurt you. Instead of making friends easily, I buried myself in books. The tiny library inside the orphanage became my escape. I read every newspaper that arrived, every biography, every history book I could find. Stories fascinated me because they always had answers. Real life rarely did. One afternoon, an old volunteer noticed me reading a newspaper that was nearly a week old. "You read like someone looking for something," she said. "I am," I replied. "What?" "The truth." She smiled, but I wasn't joking. I couldn't remember my mother's face perfectly anymore. Time had stolen the small details first, the exact shape of her smile, the sound of her laugh. Even her voice had become blurry inside my memory. I was terrified that one day I would forget her completely. So I started writing. Every memory I still had went into an old notebook. The color of her dress, the way she held my hand, the little silver necklace she always wore, the words she spoke before disappearing. I wrote everything down before time could erase it forever. When I finished secondary school, I earned a scholarship to study journalism at university. People thought I chose journalism because I loved writing. The truth was much simpler. I believed every mystery left clues. Someone just had to know where to look. While my classmates dreamed of becoming television presenters or political reporters, I became obsessed with investigations, missing records, corruption, hidden money, cold cases. Professors often joked that I noticed details nobody else could see. They had no idea why. My name is Amara Wanjiru, and for 22 years, I believed my mother chose to disappear. I built my career on other people's secrets. I exposed a councilman who stole relief funds after floods. I traced a hospital scandal back to 3 officials who had quietly sold donated medicine for profit. Colleagues called me relentless. What they didn't know was that every investigation was practice. I was training myself for the one case I could never solve, my own. I never married. I never let anyone stay long enough to ask hard questions about my childhood. I kept one photograph of my mother, worn soft at the edges, tucked inside my wallet where no one could see it. Work became the only place I felt steady because facts, unlike people, didn't disappear on you without warning. Then, on an ordinary Tuesday morning, an email arrived from a law firm in Mombasa. It referenced the estate of a woman named Naomi Wanjiru, my mother's name. The email said a storage unit had been rented under her name for over 2 decades, its fees paid anonymously every month without fail. The anonymous payer had recently passed away, and with no further payments coming, the facility was legally required to locate next of kin before auctioning the contents. A public records search had linked my name to hers. I read the email 4 times before I believed it was real. 2 weeks later, I stood in a dim storage facility outside Mombasa, holding a rusted key in front of a suitcase that had waited for me longer than I had been an adult. I expected old clothes, maybe photographs. Instead, I found letters, dozens of them addressed to me, spanning 22 years, every single one unsent. There were land documents with unfamiliar names attached to my mother's signature. There was a police report I had never seen, closed within a week of her disappearance and marked quietly as voluntary abandonment, case closed. And tucked beneath everything, a small silver necklace I recognized instantly, the one she was wearing the day she left me. I sat on the concrete floor of that storage unit and read every letter twice. My mother had not simply vanished. She had been erased, and someone had worked very hard to make sure it looked like her choice. The first letters were the hardest to read. My mother wrote that after my father died, she inherited the only asset he left behind, a small parcel of land registered in her name. My father's older brother, Silas, had wanted that land for years. When my mother refused to sign it over, he changed his approach. He threatened that if she did not disappear quietly and leave the child with strangers, he would make sure something happened to me instead. She believed leaving me at a crowded public bus station, where I would certainly be found and cared for, was the only way to keep me safe from him. She wrote that she planned to come back for me the moment it was safe. But Silas made sure that moment never arrived. He forged a statement claiming she had abandoned me voluntarily and bribed a local officer to close the search within days. He controlled which land records were filed and eventually transferred my father's land into his own name using a signature that was never truly hers. For years, my mother lived under a different name in a coastal town, working as a laundry attendant, unable to return without putting me at risk. She paid a childhood friend to quietly deposit money into that storage unit every month, money meant for a suitcase she hoped I would one day find, filled with everything she couldn't say to my face. She died of illness 11 years after leaving me. Her friend kept paying the storage fees out of loyalty, telling no one until his own death finally broke the chain. I sat with that truth for a long time before I could move. I had spent 22 years believing I wasn't worth staying for. The truth was that I had never stopped being wanted. I had simply been hidden from the person who wanted me most. I could have grieved quietly and closed the suitcase forever. Instead, I did the only thing I knew how to do. I investigated. As a journalist, I had access to land registries, court archives, and old police files. I requested the original 1990s land records for my father's parcel and compared the signatures against verified samples of my mother's handwriting from her identification documents. A forensic document examiner I had worked with on a previous story confirmed what I already suspected. The signature on the transfer document was not hers. I traced the ownership trail of the land through 3 transfers over 2 decades, all eventually leading back to companies controlled by Silas and his son. I pulled the original 1998 police file and found the same officer's badge number attached to 2 other closed cases from that era, both involving women who had also vanished shortly after inheriting property from deceased husbands. I found the officer, long retired, living quietly outside the city. At first, he denied everything. When I showed him the letters and the payment records tied to his own bank account from that year, he stopped denying it. He admitted, on record, that he had been paid to close my mother's case within a week instead of investigating it properly. I found the childhood friend's widow, who still remembered her husband quietly grieving a promise he made to Naomi. She confirmed the anonymous storage payments and pointed me toward 2 more women in the coastal town who had known my mother under her new name. They remembered her talking about a daughter in Nairobi. They remembered her crying on my birthday every year. Piece by piece, the story that had defined my entire life fell apart, and a different, truer one took its place. I did not go to Silas's house. I did not call him. I did not need to hear him explain himself, because the evidence already spoke louder than anything he could say. I compiled everything: the forged documents, the forensic report, the retired officer's statement, the witness testimonies, into a single case file and handed it to a land fraud unit and a colleague at a national newspaper who specialized in investigative reporting. I stepped back and let the process work the way it was supposed to work all those years ago, before it was corrupted. The investigation confirmed the forgery within months. Land tribunal proceedings were opened to reverse the fraudulent transfers. The retired officer's original bribery came to light publicly, alongside the other 2 cases connected to his badge number. Silas's carefully built reputation as a respected elder in his community collapsed under the weight of records that could not be argued with. I never raised my voice at him. I never needed to. The land was returned to my father's rightful estate and by law to me. There was no dramatic confrontation, no shouting, just a quiet, steady unraveling of a lie that had lasted 22 years, undone finally by paperwork and patience. Before the case fully closed, I drove to the small children's home where I had grown up. Mama Zawadi, the caregiver who had first noticed me reading old newspapers, was still there. Older now, still finding new children to comfort. I told her everything. She held my hand the way she used to when I couldn't sleep, and she said something I have never forgotten. Some mothers don't leave because they stop loving. Some leave because loving you was the only way left to protect you. With the land eventually sold and the money finally settled, I didn't buy a bigger house or a different life. I thought of Mama Zawadi's decades of quiet, underpaid devotion to children nobody came back for. I used the money to fund a small trust in my mother's name, one that pays school fees for children in that same home, and keeps a permanent funded room for a proper library, the one place that had once saved me. I visited my mother's grave for the first time that spring. It was a modest plot in the coastal town where she had spent her last years under a name that wasn't hers. I placed the silver necklace beside the headstone, along with fresh flowers. I told her I finally understood. I told her I forgave the years, even though I would never get them back. Looking back now, I think about the 10-year-old girl who sat on that bus station bench, certain she had done something to deserve being left behind. She was never the reason. She was never unwanted. She was protected by a love fierce enough to disappear for it, and stolen from by people who valued land more than lives. If there is one thing this journey taught me, it's this. The story you're told about your own abandonment is not always the true one. Sometimes the person who left didn't stop loving you. Sometimes they were fighting a battle you never got to see. The truth may take 22 years to find you, but when it finally arrives, it doesn't just answer your questions. It gives you back the parts of yourself you thought you'd lost forever.